I'm glad to be back with you this morning. One thing I do want to mention, and Tom may be mentioning this at the end of worship as well, but just excited about it. One of our teens, Joseph Ortiz, was baptized into Christ on Friday. That's awesome. Wave your hands so people know who you are. That's him. We're excited about that. Glad for him. So keep him in your prayers and the Ortiz family in your prayers if you would. So we've been going through the 7 deadly sins, and we're going to continue that this morning. I want to start off with a story today. It comes from a book that I have called A View from the Zoo. It's written by a man named Gary Richmond who spent many decades working in the Los Angeles Zoo. A lot of different roles that he played, but a lot of his time was spent in the veterinary office of the Los Angeles Zoo. And he has a lot of different stories about just some of his experiences and the animals that he dealt with and things like that. And so I wanted to share with you one of those stories this morning. He starts off by saying, Bandit was irresistible. No raccoon had ever existed, that ever existed, had more natural cute than this 90-day-old bundle of mischief. And when my neighbor Julie bought him at the pet store, she was sure that they would be lifelong friends. Everywhere she went, he went, usually perched on her shoulder. And Bandit's habit of holding Julie's cheeks in his paws and looking into her eyes with sparkling curiosity always melted her and solicited an affectionate kiss and hug. And he grew. 18 months passed, and Bandit became a strapping 25-pound adolescent raccoon, still full of the dickens and only slightly less playful. He still loved affection, he still rode on shoulders, and he seemed to make a one raccoon advertisement that raccoons make really good pets. I mentioned Julie and Bandit to our zoo veterinarian one day and inquired as to why more people didn't keep raccoons as pets, and his answer floored me. They undergo a glandular change at about 24 months, and after that they become unpredictable, independent. They often attack their owners. Are there any exceptions? I inquired. None that I know of, he said thoughtfully. Then Julie's likely to be bitten. Any time now, I should think, the doctor added with conviction. And since a 30-pound raccoon can be equal to a 100-pound dog in a scrap, I felt compelled to mention the coming change to Julie. She sat and listened politely as I explained what an eminent world authority had shared with me concerning raccoons and their nature. And I'll never forget her answer. It'll be different for me. Bandit's different. And she smiled as she added, Bandit wouldn't hurt me. He just wouldn't. 3 months later, Julie underwent plastic surgery for facial lacerations sustained when her adult raccoon attacked her for no apparent reason. And Bandit was released into the wild. And that happened 15 years ago, and I've heard Julie's reply many times since. But it'll be different for me. We've all probably uttered that phrase at one time or another in our lives. It'll be different for me. It's not going to be the same as it is for everybody else. It'll be different for me. And we assume that whatever it is that we're choosing to do, whatever it is we're being a part of, other people may have had problems with that. It may not have gone well for them. It'll be different. It'll be different for me. It's no big deal. There's not really any consequences. That affected them that way, not me. And it's that kind of attitude, it's that kind of heart that I kind of want us to be thinking about as we talk about one of the 7 deadly sins this morning. Again, we've been talking about these for the last couple of weeks and looking at these sins that for centuries have been viewed as some of the biggies, if you want to call them that. Some of the things that all of us struggle with at times in our lives, and some of us struggle with some of them more than others. But we also find these often at the root of other sins as well. And I do want to remind everybody that it's not just a list of 7 sins, and as long as you're clear of these 7, you're good to go. We've talked about how Scripture teaches that all wrongdoing is sin. Anything that we do that is against the will and the nature of God is sin. It's not just these 7. And so we want to be aware of that. We want to know. We want to spend time with the Word and know what it is that God wants from us. We want to recognize His Spirit in our lives and know where He's leading us and try to go those directions and not try to go our own way. I also want to recognize, acknowledge, and we'll talk about this towards the end this morning, but I want everybody to remember, as we're talking about these 7 deadly sins, I want you to understand that even though we call them 7 deadly sins, there is always grace to be found. There is no sin that you can commit that my God can't forgive and doesn't want to forgive. He loves you no matter what. And if any of these that we're talking about are a problem in your life, please know my God's ready to give you grace and forgiveness and wipe the slate clean today. Okay? But we're talking about how we missed the mark with some of these things. And specifically this morning, we're going to be talking about the sin of lust. If you haven't been a part of this church family for a while, then you may not understand this. But I had several people this morning going, how bad is it going to get? Because if you've been a part of this church family for a while, you know that sometimes when I talk about these kind of subjects, I don't try to be shocking or graphic, but I do try to be blunt and direct. And I'm going to do that this morning too. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I think these are things that we need to be talking about. And if we can't talk about them with a church family, this is the best place for us to be talking about these things, I think. And for us to be sharing what the struggle is and how to deal with it and how to help each other move past it. And so that's what we're going to do this morning. If you go to, if you Google the definition of lust, you'll find lots of different answers. But a lot of those boil down to the same overall definition of lust being a passionate and overmastering desire or craving. It's a craving that I'm passionate about. It's a desire that owns me. It becomes my master. And we talked a couple weeks ago about how we can be greedy for lots of different things besides money and possessions. I mean, we can be greedy for power and greedy for food and greedy for attention. And so greed doesn't just have to be about money and possessions, but that's what we limited our discussion to. And I would say the same thing about lust this morning, that we can be lustful, we can be craving a lot of different things. We can have a lust for power, we can have a lust for control, we can have a lust for money, we can have a lust for food, we can have a lust for friendships and relationships, we can have a lust for popularity. There's a lot of different things that we can have lust for and be lustful over. And we're going to limit our discussion today. We're going to kind of narrow the scope and just talk about lust as it pertains to sexual desires. It pertains to a passionate craving for sexual activity. I see what somebody is wearing. I focus on certain parts of someone's body. I watch videos or I look at photos of people engaging in sexual activity. I establish maybe even an emotional connection with a coworker or a neighbor, and I begin to turn that into sexual desire and craving sexual activity to that person as well. I develop a passionate desire in some form or fashion for sex. That's lust. And it's a problem. And it's a big problem in our culture. It's a big problem in our families. It's a big problem in our church. And not just this specific church. I mean, God's people in general. It's a problem for us. Matthew chapter 5. If you want to turn there, you can also look up on the screen. You might have a Bible app on your phone you might want to scroll to. It's in the New Testament, the first book of the New Testament. It's a story about the life of Jesus, Matthew is. And in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is in the middle of preaching a sermon and talking about different things that people at that time were struggling with. As a matter of fact, he's talking about some things specifically that they grew up hearing about in church and how the preachers and the religious leaders of his day had kind of changed the definitions of things. And so he says in verse 27, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.'" And that's true. You go back in the Old Testament to the law of Moses, to the rules and regulations that the people of Jesus' day were living under, and you find in Exodus chapter 20, for example, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." The problem was, in Jesus' day, all these religious leaders were saying, as long as you don't actually engage in some type of sexual activity, some physical activity with a person that you're not married to, you're okay. Don't commit adultery, which means don't have sex with somebody that you're not married to. That leaves a lot of gray area. That leaves a lot of room for desires and thoughts and cravings. And so Jesus is trying to get people to understand that's not what God intended. God wasn't just limiting it to the physical activity itself. You've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, I want to show you what God really wants. I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus says there's no difference between the physical act and imagining it. In the eyes of God, those are the same thing. My craving, my desire to have sex with that person because of what I see is the same as actually having sex with that person. My body might know the difference, but my mind and my heart don't. And what that means is that when I look, or when I imagine, when I watch, when I crave, I may not be physically having sex with that person, but in my mind and my heart, I have engaged in something that is supposed to be reserved for a husband and his wife. And that's why it's sin. Lust is not just something that we strongly discourage. Lust is not just something that we say, oh, that's probably not good, probably shouldn't do that. Lust is a sin. In a culture that is saturated with sexual imagery, it has become incredibly difficult for men and women today, for teenagers today, to not be affected, much less taken captive by lust. The pornography industry makes more money on a yearly basis than every other entertainment industry, music, sports, all those things combined. We have so much easy access to so many videos and so many images. And even if we take a step back from pornography, just look at advertising nowadays. Watch the Super Bowl commercials when the Super Bowl comes around. Which ads are more popular? The ones with some kind of scantily clad women in them. Because it sells, because we pay more attention to that, because it draws our eyes even more. There's all sorts of dating sites that are out there now, and some of those are good things. I'm not knocking all of them. And some of them are simply trying to get people's engines revved up to have cravings that they shouldn't. There's even websites that we've mentioned before that help you have an affair. That can help you find somebody in whatever town that you're in and make sure that y'all find some way to hook up. And if you can't actually be in the same room, there's some way that y'all can be together and talk to each other and fulfill these desires and these fantasies without actually being in the same room with that person. Look at our clothing styles. I don't want to get into a whole big thing about modesty. There's all sorts of different definitions of that, and that's not the point this morning. I just want you to understand, look at our culture nowadays and what we accept as okay. It is incredibly difficult for Christian men and women, for people who want to do what God wants them to do and be the kind of people that God wants them to be, to stay away from lust because it's all around us. And just like the story that I read at the beginning, we try to convince ourselves and try to convince other people, it'll be different for me. I can look at those things and it's not a problem. I can see that and I don't have those desires. It's not, it might be hurting somebody else. It's not hurting me. It's not hurting my family. It's no big deal. You probably have too. I personally have seen marriages end because of lust. There are spouses that struggle with the sexual relationship because he doesn't look like the image that I had in my mind. She doesn't do what I see them do on the internet. Lust becomes an addiction. And it hurts us, and it hurts the people that we care about. I belabor the point, I guess, because once you understand, it's a problem, and it's a sin. And it's not to be treated lightly. Because of some of the things, not just because of disobedience to God, but because of what lust can do and what it can cause to happen to us. Let me give you some examples real quick. One thing that lust does is lust causes me to view a human being as an object. Lust causes me to look at another person as something that I can use to provide myself with some kind of temporary pleasure. If you go back to the beginning of the Bible, the very first book, the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 1, when it describes God creating the heavens and the earth and everything that's in them. And when he decided to make us, when he decided to make human beings, of all the things that he could have picked, he picked us to be in his image. And I don't think that was just about us looking. I don't know that God looks like me. I hope he's better looking. I don't know that he's talking about physical features per se. Maybe that's part of it. But I think what he's talking about there is we want men and women to reflect us, to look like us, to walk like us, to be like us, to look like God in this world, to do the things that God would do if he was here, to reflect his image and his glory. And so when we look at each other and we see each other, we don't just see body parts and physical things, we see God. That was the original design. That was the original intent. But when I lust after someone, I don't see that person as a reflection of the image of God. I don't see someone intricately designed by God. I don't see heart. I don't see spirit. I don't see personality. I see body parts. I see physical cravings. I see an object that can be used for my pleasure and done away with. That's what lust can do. Lust can change how I view people. Lust causes me to cheapen something that God made valuable. We tend to, in churches, I know I've already made many of you uncomfortable. Because we don't talk about sex in church. And if we do, we have a special class on it in a room down the hall. We don't talk about it in the big room with everybody. And we almost sometimes treat it in church, I don't think it's intentional, but sometimes we create the message that sex is bad and it's evil and it's dirty and let's pretend that it doesn't exist. I mean, I know we got to have it, but let's not talk about it. And if we do talk about it, let's only talk about the bad stuff. Sex is a gift from God. Do you understand that? It is an awesome, beautiful thing that God gave us. And it was designed by God for pleasure and it was designed by God for fulfillment between a husband and a wife. And it's not just about the physical act itself. My desire for my spouse is based on my love for my spouse, my wanting to serve my spouse, my complete trust in this person that I'm married to, my desire to be completely intimate and have nothing hidden between the two of us. All those things are part, or should be a part of, the sexual relationship between a husband and wife. And that is precious. That is valuable. Having that kind of intimacy and that kind of trust and that kind of closeness. You don't just find that everywhere. And God said, it is so special that I want to give it to a husband and wife, and I want them to treat it as something that's awesome and special and valuable. And lust causes me to cheapen it, to take value away from it. Because lust causes me to make sex just about the physical act itself. Lust causes me not to care anything about the person that I'm looking at. Because they're just an object for my pleasure anyway. Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 5, in verse 18, all these different sayings, these wise sayings that Solomon had. In verse 18 he says, may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. And you go down to verse 19, he says, may you ever be intoxicated with her love. And Solomon says, the person that you're married to, husbands, enjoy being married to your wife. Wives, enjoy being married to your husband. Continue to fall in love with each other and be attracted to each other and desire each other. But when I take the desire that's supposed to be just for the person that I'm married to, and I have it for whatever person or whatever image or whatever video I'm looking at, that just takes the value away from it. It doesn't mean as much anymore. It's not unique to me and my spouse anymore. I cheapen it. That's what lust caused me to do. And lust eventually becomes my God. Lust eventually becomes an addiction. If you were here that Sunday, or you were part of our church family back last fall, and we had some folks that got up and talked about addictions in their lives and how they battled them and how God rescued them from those things. And the common thing there, and I would, if you weren't here that morning and never saw that video, I'd invite you to go look on our YouTube channel and listen to those testimonies. But one of the things that they came across was how mastered those people were by their addiction. Everything revolved around what it was they were addicted to. Their time, their schedule, their money, their energy, their focus, their desires, all of it focused on what it was that they were addicted to. Lust can have the same kind of control in our lives. Lust can become that kind of addiction. When I view enough videos and images, and when I have enough fantasies and thoughts about what I might do with this other person if I was in the room with them, that desire becomes my norm. I crave those images, I crave those thoughts, and I struggle to function without them. And so there are some men and women that begin to alter their schedule of the day, alter their agenda so that they can have time to either view some videos or be around that specific person, or at least see that person across the room so they can have those desires and those thoughts again. They'll begin to lie and to make excuses for why they're doing things or being in a certain place or being around certain people. They'll begin to create opportunities to feed that desire, to feed that addiction. And I might feel, if I do those things, I might feel guilty afterwards. I might, even in the process, going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have this desire. I don't want to be having this problem. But I'm going to give into it anyway. And I'll feel guilty afterwards. And I'll pray to God and ask for forgiveness and believe that He has forgiven. But that desire is still there because that lust has become an addiction. It's become my God. I serve it. I meet its needs. It controls my life. Paul says in Romans chapter 6 and verse 12, don't let sin reign in your mortal body. Don't let sin be in control. Don't let sin call the shots. Don't let anything that is against the will of God be the thing that reigns in your heart and in your body so that you obey its evil desires. Folks, that's what lust does. It takes control. It calls the shots. It becomes the thing that I give into. It becomes the thing whose will I follow. It becomes my God. These are just a handful of reasons why lust is a problem. These are just some of the reasons why we need to get away from trying to justify and rationalize our lust by saying, it's just pictures. It's just a video. It's harmless. It's not actually doing anything. I'm just looking. It's different for me. No, it's not. It's a sin. And it's a problem. And we need to get serious about it. And so you may be sitting there this morning going, okay, so what do I do? If this is a problem in my life, how do I deal with that? If I know somebody who's struggling with this and it's a constant struggle for them, what do I tell them? Let me give you some action steps really quick this morning. We'll go through these very quickly. I would invite you to write these down. I would invite you to tap them into the notes section of your phone. Maybe be ready to text them to somebody that you know is going to need them. But some things that we can do in order to deal with and get past and have victory over the sin of lust. One thing we need to do, probably the first thing we need to do, is acknowledge it. Acknowledge that it's a problem in our lives. Be honest about it. Recognize the struggle and be humble enough to admit that it is a struggle. To be willing to say, I'm embarrassed and I'm humiliated by this, but this is a problem and I don't want it to be a problem anymore. Acknowledge that there is a problem in the first place. If you go to the book of Psalms is a whole bunch of songs that David wrote most of. There's some other guys that wrote them as well. But in Psalm 32, David is writing a song. He's writing this poem and putting it to music. And he's writing it based on his experience of having sin in his life. And he doesn't describe what the sin is. But there's a problem in his life, and it's been a problem. And he's trying to pretend like it's not there. He's trying to pretend like he can handle it, and it's no big deal, and it's not bothering him. And he says in Psalm 32 and verse 3, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. David says, I tried to fix it myself, and I tried to pretend it wasn't there, and I didn't talk about it to anybody, especially not God. And when I did that, when I kept it quiet about it, and when I didn't acknowledge it, I was miserable. I felt this burden. I felt this weight. I was exhausted. Holding on to sin and trying to pretend it's not there, folks, is exhausting. It's draining, and it does nothing to solve the problem. The problem only gets worse. You want to deal with lust in your life? First thing you need to do is acknowledge there's lust in your life. Number two, prepare for it. If you know this is a problem, you know there's going to be a situation where you might be tempted to have thoughts and desires that you shouldn't be having, prepare for that ahead of time. Job chapter 31, verse 1, Job is talking about sin in his life, and he recognized ahead of time, young women would be a temptation for me. And so he says in Job 31, verse 1, I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a young woman. Job is a grown, married man with probably adult children at this time. And he says, I know what my weaknesses are. I know this is going to be a problem for me. And so, how do I deal with it? I made a covenant with my eyes. When? After I looked? While I was looking? Before the situation ever presented itself. Job says, I acknowledge the problem, and I prepared for it ahead of time. I made sure to make a promise to my eyes. I will not look lustfully at another woman. If you know ahead of time that this is a problem for you, it's a potential issue for you, then be prepared for it. And whatever that takes. Maybe there's safeguards you need to install on your computer. Maybe there's a lock you need to put on your satellite dish that you don't know the code for. Maybe there's certain friendships that need to end or at least change where you're not alone with that person at your workplace. Maybe there's people that you need to kind of step away from in your life. I don't know what the situations are, but you need to prepare ahead of time and get serious about it ahead of time before the situation ever presents itself. Acknowledge it, prepare for it. And number three, if lust is an issue in your life, starve it. Don't feed it. When I was in high school, my family took a trip to Glacier National Park in Montana. And we drove up there. I had family living up there, and we met the rest of our family in Montana, and we drove to Glacier National Park. Beautiful place to visit if you ever get the chance. We stopped at a picnic area. We had packed a bunch of stuff to make sandwiches and things like that, and we stopped in a picnic area to eat lunch together. And while we're sitting at these picnic tables eating lunch, this little chipmunk comes up. Cutest little thing. We got pictures of it and everything. Cutest little thing comes up and just kind of, those little chipmunk eyes and just sitting there looking at you. So, took a little bread, tossed it to the chipmunk. And it just ate it up. I knew it was so grateful. If I could speak chipmunk, I know I would have heard it say, I'm so thankful that you gave me this. And a couple minutes later, it moved a little closer, and it kept looking at me again. And so I gave it a little more. And then I'm trying to eat my sandwich, and it comes up on the table. This is in a national park. This is wildlife, and it's sitting on the table looking at me. And it must have said something, some kind of code, some type of chipmunk speak to its friends because they start coming. And pretty soon we're surrounded by chipmunks. It's almost a little scary. And the reason that they kept coming and the reason that the chipmunk kept getting closer is because I kept feeding it. Lust will do the same thing. It will continue to grow and continue to be a problem if I continue to feed it. So if it's a problem in my life, How do I get rid of it? I starve it. I don't feed it anymore. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 18, Paul says, flee from sexual immorality. Run away. Get away from, go in the opposite direction of sexual immorality and any hint of it. I may have to get drastic. I may have to, I may have to cut the internet for a while. I may have to get rid of data plans on my phone. I may have to install filters on my TV. I may have to absolutely end a friendship or a work acquaintance. I may have to stay away from places. I may not be able to go to the beach or down to the lake or different places where I'm going to be tempted to look and to lust. I don't need to keep feeding the problem because it'll continue to be a problem. Get drastic and starve it. And number 4, get help. Don't fight this battle alone. Of all things, don't fight lust alone because it is hard to win. You need to get help. And you may be sitting there this morning or someone you may be talking to is saying, but I can't talk to my spouse about this. They just wouldn't understand. It'd break their heart. I can't talk to, teenagers may be saying, that's too embarrassing. I cannot talk to my parents about that. I can't talk to my youth minister. I can't talk to the person I'm dating. I can't confess that to this church. I don't want people at church to know that about me. I can't talk about that with my friends. Fine. Find somebody to help you. Find somebody you can talk to and get some help. Find somebody to be an accountability partner that when the temptation comes, you can immediately call or send a text to. Find someone. Folks, on the back of your announcement sheet is my email address. Email me. I'll send you my number, and you can text or call me at any time. When you're about to struggle with lust, I don't care. Call me. We'll talk. We'll start talking about the ball game or something just to get your mind off of it if we need to. But don't fight this battle alone. Find somebody in this church to talk to. Find a trusted friend. Go get counseling. Go get help. James chapter 5 and verse 16, James says, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other. Why? So that you can be healed, so that this won't be a problem, so that you won't lose this battle. Satan is fighting for your heart, and he's fighting well through the sin of lust. Don't fight him alone. Whatever that takes. There are internet helps. There are people who care about you. I care. There's no judgment here. I want the best for you. My God wants the best for you. Get help. And lastly, get grace. Get grace. And what I mean by that is many of us who may truly be struggling with lust don't want to be struggling with lust. It's not our choice to be tempted. Satan chooses who he wants to tempt. We just choose to give in to the temptation. And the guilt that we feel and the hurt that we cause ourselves and our spouses and our families, and that can be overwhelming. And we can get to the point where we give up. We stop fighting. I'm going to give into it anyway, so I might as well not even try. And I know my family can't forgive me. I know this church probably won't forgive me. I bet God isn't really going to forgive me, or at least I'm not going to feel that forgiveness. So why even try? When we get to the point where we don't allow ourselves to experience the grace and the forgiveness of Jesus, that he says, I'll give to anyone and everyone, no matter what the sin. So I want you to hear this morning, folks, if this is a struggle for you, there is forgiveness. There is grace. There is power in the blood of Jesus to wash you clean. Take hold of it. Accept it. Experience it. In Romans chapter 7, It's one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, in the New Testament. It's Romans chapter 7, where Paul basically goes through this thing. I mean, if you don't know anything about the Apostle Paul, he's like Hall of Fame Christian. I mean, if we had his trading card, it'd be worth a lot. You know what I'm saying? He did everything right, it seems like. I mean, his church, the churches he established, the stats on that, the baptisms, the things, the letters they wrote. He wrote most of the New Testament. Man, this is Paul. And in Romans chapter 7, Paul, this awesome Hall of Fame Christian, says, every day I fight the battle of doing what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do. And he says, I know the good I'm supposed to do, but I don't do that. And I know the bad that I'm not supposed to do, yeah, that's what I do. And he says, I'm constantly battling back and forth. And I want you to understand, Paul's not talking, when he writes this in Romans chapter 7, about how he used to be. Paul is talking about right now, I struggle on a daily basis. I know the good that I want to do, and I keep doing the opposite. And he says in verse 24, what a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Paul looks at himself and says, I feel worthless because of the choices I keep making. Where can I find rescue for this? And then he answers his own question in verse 25. Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ. It's still the same answer, folks. The struggle is real. So is the grace. And you can experience it, and I want you to experience it. It will empower you to go through with these other actions that we talked about. If you will allow Jesus to forgive it, and you will allow yourself to forgive yourself, and allow your family and the people that care about you the opportunity to forgive you and to love you through it, you will become empowered to fight it even better. So get grace. I shared with this church family many years ago, so bear with me if you've heard this before. A time when I was in elementary school, I was in the first grade, and I had this new winter coat that my mom had got me for Christmas. And we were out on the playground, and it had rained the night before, and there was a big area of mud. And me and my buddies were taking turns running and jumping over this big mud puddle. Not just water. I mean, there was like actual mud, you know. And we were running and jumping, and we kept, you know, the width of the mud puddle changed. If you were over on the side, it wasn't quite as wide. And so it was kind of a contest, like, okay, now I'm stepping over a little further and going to jump over this puddle. And we kept moving to the wider part, and we got to like the biggest, widest part. And another boy in my class took a running start, and he jumped over the mud puddle. He's like, woohoo! And he's all cheering like he's awesome, and nobody else is as awesome as he is. So I got to take a stab at this. And I'm in this brand new winter coat that I had gotten for Christmas. It's probably 2 sizes too big, because that's the way my mama bought them. And I line it up, and I get a running start. And when I planted my foot just a little too close to the mud puddle, so the traction wasn't as good. And my foot, as I'm planning to jump, just kind of slid out from under me. And I went, boom, right into the mud puddle. And my friends that were all there looked for a second to make sure that I was okay. And then laughter erupted. Bah! You know. And I looked at myself. And it wasn't just, you know, water. I'm caked in mud in this new coat. And I was embarrassed, and I was trying to hold back the tears because I was scared to death of what my mama would do when she saw that coat. And I went to a pretty big private school at the time. She was actually teaching one of the older grades. And so my teacher, who was on recess duty, said, go find your mom. And so I go, and I went to her classroom. She's in the middle of teaching, and I open the door, and I walk in, and she was teaching either 6th or 7th grade, so a bunch of 12-year-olds just turned, you know, looking right at me. And she just stopped in mid-sentence. What happened? Of course, now everybody's looking at me, and I come walking to the front. And I didn't know what to say when I was walking to her room. I was like, I can't hide this. How do I what's my excuse going to be? Even if it had been something good, like, there's a bank robber, Mom, and I was chasing after him, and I fell in the mud, but I got the money back. I mean, I was trying to think of all sorts of things, just nothing good. And so I walked up to her, and she's like, what happened? And I had mud on my hands, and I held my hands up, and the tears started coming. And all I said was, I thought I could make it. I thought I could make it. I share that with you because there are some people in this room this morning. It may be lust. It may be greed. It may be anger. It may be resentment. It may be pride. There is some sin that's in your life, and it's covering you. And you're filthy in it. And you may have thought, this is not a problem. It'll be different for me. It won't affect me. And now you look at yourself, and you're just covered in filth. My mom got that coat clean. Cleaned me up and sent me on. My God can do the same for you. We're going to stand together in just a second. We're going to sing a song together, asking God to give us a clean heart. And as we're singing that song, I want you to be honest with yourself. Is there something in your life that you are covered in, that you have been trying to convince yourself and other people? I didn't think this was going to be a big deal. I didn't think it was going to affect me. I thought I could make it. I thought it would be different. And now I'm stuck in it. I'm covered in it. And I don't know what to do. Would you be willing? I know it's hard. Would you be willing to come forward in front of this group of folks and say, I'm ready to let Jesus Christ wash me clean? And if that means putting him on in baptism, we'll make that happen. And if that means you just want a brand new start, we'll help make that happen. But I want you to have confidence this morning. Folks, my God has the power and the desire to make you brand new today. Don't leave here covered in mud. Don't leave here holding on to the things that have been holding on to you. Come forward, lay them down, and give them to Jesus. He'll take them and he'll get rid of them. And we just want to help. While together we stand and sing.
Create in me a clean heart.